Join us now, Chairman of the Homeland Security Committee and member of the Armed Services Committee, Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. Senator, good morning. A lot to talk to you about. Let's begin with those hearings and what you may expect to see out of that House Select Committee tonight and what you think their job is in presenting this new evidence.
Well, I think they have an incredibly important job, and I think we're all waiting to see exactly what they put forward. As you recall, my committee did an investigation immediately after the attack on January 6th, looking at security breaches, what we need to do in order to make sure that an attack like we saw on the Capitol never occurs again. We made a number of recommendations for short-term fixes. But what was very clear, and what we talked about at that time, is we needed to have a deeper investigation. What actually prompted all of these folks to descend on this Capitol, an attempt to disrupt the election process, to basically be engaged in an insurrection here on the Capitol grounds. Certainly what came out just in our investigations is there was an awful lot of planning going on through the internet. There was a lot of chatter about folks who were coordinating their efforts to come here. So the question is, who was behind that? What led to that coordination? Who financed some of these folks? And we know folks like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and other groups were intimately involved, and there was some long-term planning that went into their involvement here, but who was ultimately behind it? And I think what the American people are going to hear tonight, as well as in further hearings, will likely be incredibly troubling. But it's important that we get that information out, because this can never happen again. We cannot allow this to happen in this country of ours.
Senator Peters, switching gears because there's just so much going on in the building in which you're standing at the moment. The Senate, of course, is also having debate on gun reform measures. I know you're not part of the small group working on it now, but you will, of course, be casting a vote before long. If we've heard from your colleague, Senator Murphy, quite a bit, sort of lowering expectations, and right now it seems like talk centering around some red flag laws, maybe slightly expanding background checks, but a lot of other measures Democrats hope to be in there seem to be falling by the wayside. If that's where they end up, is that enough?
Well, it's certainly not enough in the long run, but in the short run, I think we have to do something. There's no question that we have to show some positive momentum. There are things that we must do. So I want to allow this group to come together with ideas, see if we can get the votes necessary to get it through the Senate here. We're going to need 60 votes. We're going to need to have 10 Republicans on board. I think any kind of progress that we can make is positive, but it's not going to be enough in the long run. We're still going to have to do more. Certainly, I would like to see us closing the incredible loopholes that we have with our background checks. And, I'm a gun owner. I believe in Second Amendment rights, but there are common sense things that we can do to close those loopholes. And it's something that over 80% of the American people believe that we should do. I would hope that we could get that in this package that'll come before us. There certainly needs to be gun safety legislation in that. We have to make some positive moves forward, but understand, given the nature of where we are now and the Republican opposition we have seen to any type of gun safety laws going forward, whatever we can get now will be a positive step. And I would hope that success breeds further success. So let's see what happens in the next few days.
Senator, let's talk about the breaking news about Brett Kavanaugh. And what happened outside of his home, and talk about how that fits a wider troubling trend of domestic terror and domestic terror threats. Of course, the man outside the justice's home actually turned himself in, called 911, said he had suicidal thoughts, turned himself in. Obviously, the Wisconsin judge that was bound and shot to death, assassinated last week, not so fortunate. He had a kill list on him during the Trump era. There were several domestic terrorists, one a former Coast Guard, a member of the Coast Guard, who had a kill list of Democratic leaders, Democratic presidential candidates, members of the media. His kill list, along with just a massive amount of arms, were found in his home. What can the federal government do? How can they coordinate with state governments to stop the domestic terrorism that seems to be more and more politically motivated, from a sitting Supreme Court justice to a retired state court justice to members of Congress to members of the media?
Well, you're absolutely right that we have seen increase in these attacks and activities from domestic terrorism. In fact, if you talk to the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security, they will all say that the #1 terrorist threat in this country now is domestic terrorism. Certainly, we have to continue to keep our eye on foreign terrorism, but that's not where the significant threat lies. It lies from domestic attacks, particularly anti-government attacks. If you look at threats against folks in elected office or serving in public capacity, we're seeing these threats that go down to school board levels, city council levels. There's unprecedented number of threats against those of us who serve in Congress. And certainly this all has to be condemned. We have to make sure that folks who engage in any of these activities are held accountable and are punished to the full extent of the law. But we also need to be working in a very proactive way, similar to what we did when dealing with foreign terrorism with our intelligence services, and making sure that the Department of Homeland Security is attempting to track groups in particular that espouse dangerous ideologies. Today we're going to be doing a hearing in my committee talking about the insidious ideology of white supremacy and replacement theory and how that is actually stoking a lot of the recent attacks that we have seen. In fact, the majority of attacks in domestic terrorism across the country are being propagated as a result of these kinds of insidious ideologies. And then share that information. The federal government has an opportunity to collect the data, the intelligence necessary to try to identify individuals who could perhaps engage in violence, and then work closely with local law enforcement. Ultimately, it's going to be local law enforcement that's the tip of the spear in order to prevent these attacks from occurring, apprehending potential attackers, and acting quickly and responding quickly when an attack actually occurs. But it clearly has to be a state and local partnership with the federal government in order to deal with this increasing threat.
Senator, as you just pointed out, January 6th was a threat to the stability of our democracy and the way we govern ourselves. And that threat continues up until right this very moment, as you just again pointed out. My question to you is, having access to some of the information and intelligence gathered by the January 6th committee, because America has an increasingly short attention span, is there anything that you know of that is a holy cow moment in what you know about the hearings? A moment that will make people say, wow, didn't know that?
Well, I think we need to let the hearings play out. I don't want to get ahead of what we're going to see in the hearings in the coming days. I think it is important for everyone to get the complete story, because the complete story is incredibly damaging, and it's important to take a look at that and understand. When folks hear that story, understand how fragile this democracy is. We can't necessarily rely on institutions by themselves if the American people themselves do not stand up and say, we will never tolerate this type of activity. We will never allow attacks on the very foundation of our democratic republic that we have here in this country. So I think it's important for folks to look at it in its entirety. They're going to hear a lot. They're going to see a lot. And I hope there is a widespread passion from the American people to understand that we all have a stake in the future of this country. We all have to speak out. We all have to condemn these actions. And we all have to be vigilant every single day to make sure that our democracy stays strong.
Chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Senator Gary Peters, thank you very much for joining us this morning.